Welcome to the next topic of my quick tips. Today I will go over the CSS Container Queries. That's like a new way how you can write styling based on the width of a container. That means I have here an example that says this is a responsive item, and if I'm changing the size of it, you see like it changing the background color. I'm not changing the size of the browser, it's only be like changing the element size, and based on that it's changing its styling. I think most of the developers know the media queries. That's like the approach when you want to change some styling based on the size of the browser. For example, if you enable the DevTools and changing here, it applying it or like changing the viewport size, and that means it will change based on the browser size. What we now have is container-based media queries, I would name it. That means based on the size of a container, we can apply stylings on an element. To make it simpler for me and also showing more content, I'm using Angular in the background, and we will show that code based on Angular. If you're not familiar with Angular, it's kind of like a library, a framework that using component-based approaches. That means everything you see here is kind of a container that only contain the styling, JavaScript and HTML for that specific part of the page. Okay, let us quickly take a look into the styling of this container. We can go into that with the DevTools, and what already can be seen is that here Chrome shows me a container tag. If I'm clicking on it, you see like it makes this purple border around it because Chrome shows me the container that get used as a reference. What is important is that we setting, like I go in the styling, eventually then it's simpler to understand. We have here the basic container query example. We have a class container and we have a class item. When we now look at the styling, we have the container class, and here we set the container type to inline size. There are three different options. The normal one is like the default value that always get used on every element, but that is not part of the container query part. And we have size and inline size. The difference between that both is that the size, like giving you the ability to make like a two-dimensional query. That means you can tell it should do some styling if the container like reaching a specific size in like 2 dimensions, and the inline size as like the display block and display inline is kind of like the width or the how the container kind of flows. That means if you have a container and it kind of reaching the end of the browser, it like getting you the width. Everything you made is based on the width of the container. So what we also have is a width 100, a background color, and we allow resizing and so on. And now here the magic happens. Because we have here set it a class that it should be container type inline size, this queries here can be used like add container, and then we can define at which widths it should get applied. It's exactly the same as you would write media queries. You like defining a min width and then the pixels, and as long as the container is smaller than the min width, it applies the styling. And in between, like here 500 and 300, it applies that one, and if it is over 500, it kind of using the base styling because the styling, the CSS is written below the rest of the styling. Now we can take a look onto the add container. We have here like defined a min width of 300 pixels, and that should change the item to padding 20 pixels and the background color to a different color, and the same for that one. That container queries work the same as the media queries in a kind of a way, because the container, like applying it based on the container that comes above the stylings. That means you can also define container type inline size even more levels up, and it will use the container that is like the nearest to them. And with the min width 300 pixels, we're defining that it should apply that styling if it is above 300 pixels. And here, like in between 300 and 500, it will use that styling. And if it is above 500, it will use that styling. And if it is below 300, it will use that styling here. So let us take a quick check. We are like here. That's like 259 pixels. And we're using the color F0, 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 which equals to, okay, was not on the item. In the item we have D0, 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 exactly. And if we now going up, it changes. And you see now we have here a div.container, and that is like the container query that we have created, and that overrides the styling now. That means now it uses A0, 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 and if we go even bigger, it uses 70, 70, 70. Yeah, and also applying the padding. Exactly, but the rest of the styling not really doing much in that example here. Okay, hopefully you kind of understand the main concept of this thing. Now we will look into a practical container example. You are a front-end developer working with Angular. I have created a course for everyone wanting the latest info on Angular 17 and 18. It covers built-in control flow, standalone components, signals, migrating to Angular 17, and building an app from scratch. The course is in the description. Here, we can quickly close this. Here you see we have like the same component. That's the reason why I'm using Angular here, because we have the same container or the same component that uses media queries. And the benefit now is that we're using the same stylings for both of them, and they can behave matching with their sizes. That's like the magic. We can quickly open this one. It's also relatively simple, but it pretty much shows what are the benefits of it. Here we have like a card for the Joe Doe, and here the Jen Smith, and here UX designer, web developer. So if we're checking at the CSS, it's getting bigger, but I only will go over the main concept of it. As I said, that's like a component. That means, or in that example, it's not a component at the moment, but it's using the same HTML. And we're defining here like the sidebar and the main container, like container type inline says. If we're checking here, this one is a main container and this one is a sidebar. That means if you're checking out the HTML, you see that both of them have the container definition. And if we're clicking on them, you can see what the containers are. So if we go a little bit deeper, we define here that if the container is bigger than 300 pixels, it should make the card flex with a flex web and make the image bigger. if the container is smaller than the 300 pixels, it's not defining it as flex, and yeah, kind of aligning it and change a little bit at the image. You can see it here. Like here, it not using flex because it's smaller than 300 pixels. It's like 200. Let us go exactly. Okay, yeah, the padding is not like part of the container size that get used. That means if we're checking the inner part, it's like smaller than 300 pixels. And that leads to the styling that it not applying flex, and also, yeah, kind of using the default styling that is set here. And for the other one, it uses the flex because it's bigger. It uses the flex and the flex web. And if we make this thing smaller, you can kind of see that, okay, it's not perfectly responsive, but you see like that the right container now have the flex web and the left one like maintain with its styling. If it get bigger, in that example here, it's changing its styling based on the width. Now, also one interesting thing is that there are container query units. If we're checking it out, it's a simple example. We have a container, we have the item, and so on. We again make the container type inline size. And yeah, like applying that, we can resize this whole thing. And what happens here is that if you're getting too small, it jumps in the font size. What we now can use here in that example is the font size CQV, that kind of stands for the width of the container. That means, as you already have seen, it scales with the size of the container. That's like also a very important thing to know, that there are units that are based on the size of the container. As you can see, like it kind of stays until it like jumps. It stays in the same size relative to the width. Like if you like looking at the distance to the right corner, or to the right edge, it changing its size and relation based on this. And here we also have a container query that says if it is bigger than 400 pixels, it should use Q2. It's like an relative percentage. That means it's 2% of the width. And then when it like reached the point where it getting smaller than 400 pixels, it using 4% of the width. That's the reason why it's kind of jumping in that way here. I hope that helped you a lot with the container units. In the next video, we will go over more complex examples, and also I will quickly go over the other two-dimensional container type that's named size. I hope you liked the video and subscribed, and hopefully I see you in the next video.